So, irritable bowel syndrome is obviously a term that is used as a huge, great big umbrella term for really a collection of symptoms that are very specific to every person. And they can occur because of problems in all sorts of different parts of the digestive system. No one single preparation is ever going to work for everyone. I mean, that's the case with everything as well as gut health. But there is quite a nice combination of products which you can put together as a protocol. And obviously looking at the physical health, mental health as well, can play a huge role in all the different aspects of irritable bowel syndromes. But obviously it's about identifying where the main cause might be for the symptoms that people are presenting with. So the general symptoms which you might see: constipation, diarrhoea, indigestion and heartburn is very common. Allergies and sensitivities that can be brought on from poor gut health. The obvious bloating and flatulence that people will exhibit. Abdominal pain and fatigue as well, which obviously very often comes as a consequence of all of these problems that people have as an ongoing issue. So the contributing factors for all of these different conditions or symptoms can be low stomach acid or high stomach acid, and it's sometimes quite difficult actually to determine which that is, particularly when people are getting a sort of reflux issue, because it doesn't always suggest that it's actually high stomach acid. So that can be quite tricky sometimes to sort of really identify which it is. An underactive intestine or pancreas, so poor digestive enzymes and pancreatic health. Liver and gallbladder complications obviously can cause a lot of problem further down in the digestive system. And the intestinal flora dysbiosis is a very common one, which lots of practitioners will be looking at with regard to the sort of candidiasis and more systemic problems that can occur from like ongoing dysbiosis and SIBO. Intestinal permeability, again, some really good protocols, supplement protocols that you can use to help this. And again, it's something which, for people who have had long-term issues with digestive health, the permeability of the gut lining is often compromised. So it's something to, again, get familiar with some of the products that can be very helpful. And of course, constipation is a really contributing factor, but again, a symptom of that. So, what can be done? So, diet and lifestyle, obviously, that will always be the forefront of any kind of investigation into someone's digestive health. We know there's lots of things we do wrong with our diet. There's plenty of things which our patients aren't doing great. None of us are probably either. Even the most staunch nutritional therapists in the room often actually claim that their diet isn't as perfect as it could be. But there's obvious things which can influence the various different conditions. High sugar, high refined carbohydrates, all the things which are going to raise blood sugar and raise the sort of sugar content. Obviously high fat, high saturated fat in the diet, poor fibre content to the diet, which obviously can contribute to things like constipation. They're all things which will make a huge difference if someone is prepared to change them with regard to their digestive health. That's obviously something which you have to work with. I can see you smiling over there, like
prepared to change.
Yes, prepared to change. And lifestyle as well. I mean, really sedentary lifestyle. Some people's work doesn't give them opportunity just to move around, and we know that obviously exercise and just moving is crucial for our digestive health. So lots of things like that can contribute. And equally, the other end of the scale, which is people who are, training and actually working very hard on exercise, that can equally have an effect on the digestive system. So, there's two ends of the scale to obviously address with that thing, and trying to find a happy medium can make a huge difference with people's digestive health. So adopt a suitable diet to aid the recovery of the symptoms. Certainly if it's things like constipation, movement is one of the biggest things. We all know that in the room, that obviously moving the body itself will help with all those digestive systems as well as all the other systems of the body, circulation, And you can use supplements where appropriate, but I think there's a lot that can be done initially. As much as we're a supplement company, there's a massive amount that can be done just with diet and lifestyle alone for some people, and with obviously your sort of physical therapy as well that can offer people help with digestive health. And the other thing is actually more so probably with practitioners looking for nutritional therapists, sometimes homeopaths. The laboratory testing, which is now available, actually a lot more nutritional therapists are using the lab testing now, and there are some really good sort of stool or blood tests that can be done. Biolab, Genova, all these other quite significant laboratory testing places now available, and they're becoming more affordable as well. So sometimes just to be able to identify the the sort of root cause of someone's SIBO or something like that can be just what someone needs to just start to determine what you're actually going to be looking at from the point of view as a protocol. So that is available. There's a company called what's it called? BTS, Biological Testing Service. They're actually a lab over in Germany, and they do a stool sample test which will identify pathogenic bacteria, candida overgrowth, and it's very affordable stool test that you can do because they ship poo basically over to Germany and then they analyse it there and then it comes back. But what it comes back with is a full kind of profile really of that person's gut bacteria, and also some guidelines on what you can do to help restore a balance there. So that's quite a useful lab to use. I'm not saying that you're going to start sending your patients off to have poo samples done, but it's something that is available and it can be something that you can get involved with. Certainly the lots of nutritional therapists using it now. So if we're going to start with one of the contributing factors, so low stomach acid, this is the sort of things that people will often complain of. So it's very much that fullness sort of immediately after eating food, because basically they're not producing the sort of sufficient stomach acid in order to actually break down that food. So you'll often find someone who's probably not chewing their food enough either, but they're actually the stomach acid there isn't breaking it down quickly enough. There isn't sufficient to start that initial process. Bloating, because basically as that food travels down, partially broken down, it obviously enters the small intestine, and there the digestive enzymes don't have enough surface area to work on. So what you find is that the actual food particles start to ferment and they produce gas, and obviously that's where a lot of wind and bloating can occur with someone sometime later, usually sort of 2 or 3 hours after eating. Poor appetite. So people who have insufficient stomach acid, they're not stimulating that kind of hunger. So a lot of people will find that the trigger isn't there for them to actually feel hunger. So they're not actually, they're basically not having that hunger pang. Frequent stomach upsets, that's a common one because of course the hydrochloric acid in our stomach is one of our first lines of defence when it comes to pathogens. So if we are consuming things and we haven't got that initial kind of killing off via the acid, then obviously that potentially can cause people to have kind of recurrent problems or just have that kind of general constitution, which means that they're the person who's always getting the stomach upset. That could be as a consequence of having a low stomach acid. And constipation as well, because again this is all part of the trigger mechanism to the colon to encourage peristalsis. That stomach acid in the lining of the stomach is what will actually trigger that consequent of the peristalsis in the colon. So they can all be the sort of symptoms you might see of someone with low stomach acid, but I think initially it's always going to be that person who just feels very full after they've eaten and really kind of quite bloated, sort of, shortly after they have eaten. So the action for this person: reduce stress. High cortisol levels will always basically cause all sorts of problems in the digestive system, but it will contribute to things like low stomach acid. Eat slowly and actually chew well. Nobody probably can honestly say that they're chewing their food enough times, and I think the jury's out a little bit on how many times you should chew, but we're talking about sort of 25 times per mouthful. And if you actually start eating and you sit there and start counting, you'll realise how few chews we actually do with a mouthful of food, particularly when you're on the go and you're scoffing a sandwich in the car, and And at the end of the day, that first line of our digestion starts in the mouth, and our saliva contains all that amylase enzyme, which is going to start to break down carbohydrate. Apparently, if you chewed a piece of bread for long enough, it would actually start to taste sweet, because if you keep it in the mouth long enough and that amylase works and works, it's breaking down those sugars, and actually you would eventually taste a sweet taste. So it's really important that we chew, but let's face it, I know I don't chew well enough most of the time, but if I had digestive issues that were bothering me, then actually it might be something that I would start to think, okay, I'm going to pay a bit more attention to how many times I'm chewing. And it can make a huge difference to that initial stimulating of the stomach acid. Eat small and frequent meals. If you're someone who suffers with this kind of digestive complaint, then don't eat huge, great big meals. Start to just do that kind of grazing. So you're just having smaller meals throughout the day, and definitely avoid drinking lots of liquid just prior to eating or during a meal, because all you're doing is diluting that smallish amount of stomach acid that you have maybe going on there. Some of the kind of supplementy type things you can do. Cider vinegar is something that's actually very cheap and effective if you can sort of stomach it, because it's a bit of an acquired taste. But cider vinegar with a bit of honey, taken just prior to a meal, during that time when you're sort of building up that kind of hunger and you're smelling the food and you're starting to actually generate some of those digestive enzymes and stimulate that stomach acid, a little bit of cider vinegar can do a lot to actually just enhance that. So again, you're just helping to encourage that stomach acidity. And there's also the amino acid L-histidine, which we do a complete range of the free-form amino acids in ambers, and that's very effective again at stimulating stomach acid and hydrochloric acid. So something to consider, but personally I'd be going down the kind of cider vinegar and all the other things first before you start actually looking at supplements like that to be taking. And of course we actually do hydrochloric acid and pepsin as a supplement, so that again is something that if someone is trying to do all of the top things and actually it's still struggling with the stomach acid, then you've got actual supplements like the digestive enzymes and the HCl and pepsin. So they are all available and very safe to use. I think people get a bit frightened of HCl and pepsin as a supplement because it seems a bit dire to be using an acid, but actually some American scientists are using massive amounts of HCl for patients with poor digestive health, almost to the point where they actually dose people according to at what point they actually start to feel the burn. So they'll actually start taking supplements up to the point where they're taking maybe 10, 12 a day, and that's where they stop it, when they start to actually feel it, which seems a bit dire. We wouldn't recommend that. But it is something which you can use quite safely, and I think it's always been something that just frightens people a bit. The digestive enzyme supplements are actually probably my first port of call. We do a lovely plant enzyme, and I'm going to do a little demonstration in a little bit for you just to give you an idea of exactly kind of how they're working. But the plant digestive enzymes are great for someone who is just experiencing that kind of fullness and just feeling after they've eaten and just feel like it's not going down, like they swallowed a pillow. The digestive enzymes are great for that. But generally speaking, low stomach acid, it's that kind of things, those kind of symptoms which people are going to experience, particularly things where people maybe are experiencing poor, like recurrent problems with C. difficile and other things which cause diarrhoea. It can often be because of low stomach acid. So the next one is high stomach acid. This one is usually, again, can be the things that people misinterpret, because often we will think straight away of like heartburn and that reflux and the kind of burning sensation that people will get, stomach pain, especially just before or just after eating a meal. Often actually it will start up just before a meal, because it's, again, as your stomach, as you're smelling the food and you're expecting to eat, that's when you're generating all the acidity and the enzymes are starting to be produced. So if you do have slightly excessive stomach acid, then that's often the time when you'll experience this, because you also haven't got any food kind of on top of it to kind of dampen it down. And it's basically the hydrochloric acid irritating the stomach lining which causes this pain and discomfort that people experience. So the sudden and acute indigestion, heartburn. More severe would be if someone was actually experiencing problems with that black tarry stool, because that would indicate obviously potential bleeding much further up in the digestive system and in the stomach, and that is certainly something that you're going to send them straight back to the GP about. Quite often, some of these people it's relieved if they take something which is quite alkaline. So if you were to drink milk or drink a carbonated drink, something like that, that's often where people will have tried that. They go, oh, I always have to have a glass of milk, or I find that a fizzy drink helps me, or of course they're always popping a Rennie. That's the classic Rennie or Gaviscon is what they live on, because obviously they've got this issue. Where the slight complication comes in is if you have an issue with a hiatus hernia, for instance, even someone with a low stomach acid will still experience some of that, because actually they're having that. It's because of even a small amount of hydrochloric acid will be irritating that area. So that's where sometimes if there's more of a pathology, presenting, then obviously there's other things that you can do for that. And we don't have one, but there's a lovely product called Slippery Elm, which I don't know whether you've heard of. It's you can usually get it in a powder form or in a tablet, but basically it's used by a lot of medical herbalists as a kind of coating for the mucous membrane. So where there's a lot of that kind of irritation occurring, some people find that Slippery Elm could be really effective. I wish Lambert's did one, but we don't have one at the moment. So that's another thing to consider. Obviously, if there's an ulcer suspected, or if there's anything that's presented before from a GP, then we want to be sending them back to a GP, particularly if you're looking at sort of problems with stool colour. But generally speaking, again, high cortisol, for long periods of high cortisol from excessive stress in someone's life, physical or mental, will compromise that mucous membrane health. So that is always something to consider with anyone with a raised stomach acidity. And you do tend to kind of get that typical person who is highly stressed, living on Rennies, lots of stuff going on, but actually, they're just generating a potential issue with, that long-term high cortisol causing a breakdown of the mucous membrane. And that's obviously can, over time, cause a lot more problems. Avoiding non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, so people who are taking a lot of Nurofen, and I'm sure you're seeing them a lot with obviously musculoskeletal issues, taking lots of these medications to help with inflammation, but of course that has such a dire effect on the stomach lining. So avoiding things like that if possible, and obviously we have other anti-inflammatory herbs and things which can be really effective, which don't have that effect on the mucous membrane health and the stomach lining, but Nurofen and things like that have quite a profound effect on stomach lining. So if you have issues with high stomach acid, that's one of the last things you want to be doing, is taking aspirin or things like Nurofen. And things like hot spices and tea and coffee, as much as we like it, in moderation, because it's not something that actually is particularly good for mucous membrane health. Aloe vera, again, we used to have a really nice aloe vera juice, but we had issues with the production. But there's lots available, and aloe vera is a fabulous, drink that you can use to soothe all that sort of top part of the digestive tract. Particularly, again, if you've got people who are experiencing this kind of pain and heartburn, aloe vera is fabulous for that. And the other thing to consider again is the amino acid glutamine, because the glutamine is the substrate for our epithelial cells in the small intestine, and equally again the mucous membrane health throughout the digestive system.
Can I just ask about aloe vera? If someone's got heartburn that's affecting their esophagus, is it better for them to drink the gel aloe vera, or is it, because I know you do tablets?
We do a tablet form.
And I always wondered with the tablets whether they were just going straight down into the stomach and whether they had any effect on the esophagus.
No, if I'm honest, I think the liquid one we used to have is the one that's much better for that kind of coating,
Right.
soothing effect, particularly up high in the stomach. So any of those liquid versions that you see, that's what I would probably go for. There's a lot more research looking at aloe vera in the form we do it, actually for sort of further down the digestive health, digestive tract, in helping with constipation and sort of a more of a soothing effect further down the gastrointestinal tract. But I think if it's that high up hiatus hernia type, valve health, where there's that heartburn, then I think the liquid is definitely the one I would choose to use. Just a shame we can't say Lambert's has one. We did have a really nice one, but it's the bottles just kept blowing and fermenting, so we had to get rid of it. One day we might get a new one back, and then I'll be able to tell you we've got one. But yes, so liquid aloe vera, I think personally I would go for that in the stomach issues. And glutamine, obviously, again, for helping repair the mucous membrane. So if someone has had ongoing problems with high stomach acid symptoms, and they obviously have issues with irritation of the mucous membranes, then again, it's really crucial to make sure you're restoring that integrity of those mucous membranes and helping repair them. And that's where glutamine is a fabulous amino acid, and it's used a lot, we'll see later, for gut permeability in the small intestine. And it's available in the powder form. You need quite a lot. You're talking about taking sort of 5 or 6 grams a day when you're actually addressing a problem with gut integrity or mucous membrane health. So powdered form is the better form to go for, rather than popping masses of capsules every day, which is what you do with a capsule form. And the other thing to do, again, when we were looking at avoiding things like the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, is to consider some of the other anti-inflammatory herbal supplements. The essential fatty acids are really important for helping control our inflammatory prostaglandin production. So there's lots of herbs which you can consider instead of, if you're trying to help someone, obviously, to come off some of the Nurofen that might be causing the problems, or the aspirin or something like that. So that's always worth considering. And actually, I go into more depth in the second part of this training, which I don't think we're going to get to. So I might kind of cover in more depth things like the turmeric and the essential fatty acids maybe before we leave today, if we don't get through to that musculoskeletal one, because it's very topical, obviously, for the digestive health as well. So again, very much about helping to control it through very much the sort of diet and lifestyle, actions with the stomach acid. So trying to reduce stress, all those things, and avoiding some of the things which are going to exacerbate high stomach acid, and then looking at things which are going to help soothe the stomach and also help to re-establish good mucous membrane health, if that's something that's been an ongoing issue for someone. So then we get through into the sort of underactive small intestine and poor digestive enzyme production, basically. I just have a little something here I wanted to mention. The main complaints, again, they're actually not dissimilar to some of the ones we've just spoken about, because a lot of people will, again, become sort of bloated sort of hours after they've eaten something. So it might not be that where the low stomach acid is producing that immediate, nothing's going down, it's just stuck there. This is something which, an hour or two after they've eaten, then they start to feel a bit bloated, and it's not nothing's happening, and feel a little bit sluggish. And that's often, again, because the digestive enzymes aren't being produced in sufficient quantities to really get that secondary breakdown of the food in the stomach. So we've done a really bad job of chewing it, we've eaten it, we've got maybe mediocre stomach acid which has started to break it down. What we want to happen as it goes further down into the stomach and towards the duodenum is that those digestive enzymes start working, and they obviously help to break the food down even further, and that's when we can get all of our nutrient absorption from the food that we've eaten. If that doesn't happen, then again those food particles are too big, there's not enough surface area for the enzymes that are being produced to work on, and again you get these food particles that just hang about, start to stagnate, cause bloating because they're producing gas. Often you'll have problems with, again, the kind of pain and cramps. A lot of people get that kind of trapped wind pain at this point. And it can cause like an alternating constipation and diarrhoea for a lot of people. because again, those enzymes are the things which are going to encourage a transit time through the gut, so we're trying to get everything out eventually. And because that isn't happening properly, you're not stimulating that kind of transit time and peristalsis. It's also, this is a typical patient who's had a gastric band, and I think that's becoming more and more apparent with patients, and lots of people are being given the option now of gastric band. And of course, by restricting that lower down part of the stomach, you immediately compromise your pancreatic or your digestive enzyme production in that area. And a lot of people now who have basically obviously gone down that route of gastric band help in order to help lose weight are now finding that they're getting these digestive complaints, and also of course really poor nutrient absorption, because those digestive enzymes are so important for really breaking that food down to the point where it's offering the nutrients within that food for absorption. So nutrient absorption from food with a gastric band patient is seriously compromised because their digestive enzymes aren't being produced in a sufficient quantity. So definitely something to consider with that kind of, I suppose, secondary part of digestion. So once you've got something down right at the bottom of the stomach and in through into the small intestine and the duodenum, action is very similar again. Eating small, more frequent meals and chewing well is just, it's the mainstay of all of these complaints, and reducing stress. The fluid of the meals, again, anything you do to basically dilute what you've got in your stomach is going to compromise the way that the food is actually able to break down. And this is where you can really do quite a lot with supplements. And the digestive enzymes is the one which I think is the most key at this point, and very effective. It doesn't have to be something people take with every meal. They don't need to be thinking every time I have a meal I've got a proper digestive enzyme. But often people will maybe be able to identify certain things. I know myself, I use a digestive enzyme if I'm having kind of quite a heavy protein meal. So if I'm having a steak or something like that, lots of like a meat dish. I know sometimes I can struggle to digest that, and I find that a digestive enzyme does a really good job of helping to just help me down to breaking down those foods. So some people use it very kind of symptomatically almost. Also consider that low hydrochloric acid may also be a contributing factor to this. And things like ginger and turmeric, again, they're great carminatives. So they help to calm that kind of smooth muscle spasm that you might get with the trapped wind type feeling. I know our peppermint oil has a really high menthol content to it, and it's very good at helping to soothe or to relax that smooth muscle tissue. What is worth noting though on peppermint is the fact that because it's very good at helping to relax smooth muscle tissue, which is why it's so good for that kind of spasm in the small intestine, it shouldn't however be used by someone where you know or suspect that there is like a hiatus hernia, because of course that muscle itself, the last thing you want to do is be relaxing it anymore if it's already become relaxed enough to cause problems. So peppermint not so much to be used by someone who's maybe experiencing that reflux, because there's a suspicion that it could be to do with that valve itself. But if it's cramping further down and that kind of typical trapped wind feeling, that's where peppermint can be incredibly good to consider. So next one, so impaired liver and gallbladder function. So now we've got into the duodenum, into the first part of the small intestine with our food. This person will probably complain of a bit more nausea and bloating, particularly if they've eaten fatty foods. So this is because obviously we're not producing enough of the bile possibly to break down the fats in the food that we've just eaten. People tend to be intolerant to alcohol if they've got very poor kind of liver function or bile flow and gallbladder function. Again, because of the fact that the liver itself is maybe compromised in some way with regard to its pathways, its detoxification pathways. So people who really don't tolerate alcohol at all can be, it can be as a as a consequence of having poor liver function. There's lots of stuff we can do a whole topic on, obviously liver function and supplements to help that, and diet and lifestyle, but it can contribute to this nausea and bloating that people experience, because you're not basically producing sufficient bile and it's not being secreted into the small intestine enough to actually start to break down the fat foods. So that's something which obviously is worth considering. Things like the jaundice is a bit of an extreme thing, but obviously that potentially can be something you could see, which is this build-up of bilirubin from the bile salts. And constipation, high fat left lingering around in the small intestine and further down into the large intestine is a big problem for people experiencing constipation. It really does sort of inhibit that peristalsis and leads to that kind of sluggish bowel that people get. When your gallbladder contracts, when we're eating food, our gallbladder contracts, secretes bile into the small intestine. That contraction of the gallbladder itself is a trigger message to the colon to encourage peristalsis. So some people who have found that they get, whatever they do with their diet, they're eating high fibre, they're doing everything they can, they're taking supplements, and they just feel like it's a very sluggish bowel. Very often it could be because there is poor bile flow, and the actual gallbladder itself, if triggered, can actually encourage that peristalsis. Often, of course, someone may be experiencing high cholesterol, again, because this is something that's just all connected to the liver function, liver detoxification pathways, and the way that our bodies are able to actually eliminate cholesterol via the bile once it's secreted into the gut. There's an opportunity for our bodies to actually eliminate cholesterol at that point, but of course if that whole function is compromised in some way, it means that the circulating cholesterol of the body isn't able to be eliminated so quickly. So someone with raised cholesterol could draw the question, is there, are there issues with your digestion, and actually look at whether there's a link between the actual liver function and bile production. And also foul smelling stools. Any fat, again, in the stool will encourage bacteria. So that's another thing which is not nice to talk about. It's a typical thing that if there's a lot of fat in the stool, it's often a cause because of the pathogenic bacteria that's able to survive in that environment. So not nice to obviously have to talk to someone about that, but it is something that may be an indication that that's the problem. So the action for this person is obviously looking specifically at the liver, and a good diet which is going to encourage the detoxification pathways in the liver. It's a very simple, healthy diet, really. But again, looking at someone's diet, very often we'll find people have far too high fat in the diet to start with, and also high in sugar and refined carbohydrates. That can do a huge amount by just limiting that, increasing maybe the fruit and vegetables to encourage the fibre, and reducing the amount of fat and sugar. And obviously we very much need our meat and vegetable proteins as well, because they're the things which are going to supply all of those amino acids which are so crucial for our liver detoxification pathways and the methyl cycle in the liver. So protein is paramount, really, when it comes to liver health. And sometimes nutrition, I know in the past we've had big discussions across the table in our seminars with regard to some of these detox diets that people go on, like in January, where they're going on the sort of fasting diet where they eliminate all protein from the diet, or they eliminate pretty much everything, but protein is actually eliminated as well. And if you starve your body of amino acids for more than 24 hours, it has a consequence on the liver function and the way that your detoxification pathways work. So the irony is it actually doing the reverse to what you want to be doing with a detox? Because actually you want to be stimulating that whole detoxification pathway in the liver, not starving it of some of the crucial amino acids that are responsible for that. So for us, a good detoxification diet would be probably something which does have a high vegetable and fruit content for a short period of time, but certainly providing it with the protein you need. So whether it's just lean meat, you know, throughout the day during that detoxification. It's something that does need to be in some way supplemented or used as part of the diet. But it's really important for the liver detoxification. That phase 2 detox relies very much on our amino acids, particularly L-cysteine. So we do need to be looking at protein levels in these people. Avoid coffee. I don't actually know why that's there. I'm assuming it's a caffeine thing, but I'm not quite sure why that's there specifically for liver function. Supplement-wise, artichoke. Milk thistle is the one that everyone's very familiar with, and we all talk about milk thistle as soon as we think about anything to do with detox and liver. Milk thistle is the thing that everybody talks about, and it is obviously true to say that it is very important for liver function. It's very important for the kind of cell regeneration health of the liver. That's where milk thistle has its main action is. And as a consequence of that, obviously, it's really important for overall liver health. So if someone is burdening their liver unnecessarily because they drink a lot, or they're just got a really rubbish diet, or whatever it is that is actually burdening the liver, milk thistle is brilliant for helping just to restore that cell health, restore the whole organ health, and obviously as a consequence of that, you improve the general detoxification pathways of your liver. What artichoke is more specifically used for is actually encouraging that bile flow, which is why it's maybe more suited for this particular person who's experiencing problems with their digestion and isn't just kind of addressing their liver health for whatever reason it is, because artichoke is very good. It's a relative of the milk thistle, or the thistle family, so it's a very similar compound, but what it's shown to do is actually encourage the contraction of that gallbladder, so it's encouraging the bile flow into the small intestine, and again also of course encouraging that peristalsis in the colon. So artichoke is a fabulous product to consider for people who are those chronically constipated crowd, or the person who's addressing raised cholesterol, because again you're trying to improve bile flow, and very much that person who is experiencing these kind of symptoms where it's an intolerance to kind of high fatty foods, and a tendency to always get uncomfortable after eating anything that's got a high fat content, and obviously all those other contributing factors that could be there as well. So artichoke is a really good supplement, and we're one of the few companies that actually have a really nice high potency artichoke, and sometimes I think it gets overlooked too easily, and it's such a fabulous herb to consider. And you can take it as a sort of ongoing supplement just to maintain healthy liver function and healthy digestion. But if you've got a patient who is constipated, they're really struggling, they're doing everything they can with their diet and fibre content of the diet, and exercising and everything else, but they're still finding that they have a very sluggish bowel, that's where the artichoke, what I've found from experience with practitioners, can be really effective. So you would take a maximum of 6 a day of our one, and you basically take 2 with each of the meal. So you're kind of encouraging that bile flow during each of the meals, and it can have a really quick effect. It's not in any way a laxative, so people don't need to be concerned with, oh, you're not giving me a laxative, it's not senna, it's not something that's going to mean they've got to stay near a toilet. It's just about trying to encourage that movement and the peristalsis in the bowel. And I've just had lots of really good feedback, including my sister. I'm sure she'd love me telling you that. But,
just ask, is that especially useful if someone doesn't have a gallbladder? They have it taken out?
If they've not got a gallbladder, then actually artichoke is a bit redundant, if I'm honest. So, because its main action is on that gallbladder itself. So, whilst it will still have an effect by being beneficial to the liver, so obviously liver function is really important anyway, because although you haven't got a gallbladder, your liver is still producing bile, and it's still sort of drip feeding into the system. But the kind of profound effect that the cynarin has in artichoke is very much on the actual gallbladder itself. So obviously if you've had one removed, then you're only partially getting what you would from that. What I would tend to suggest for someone who's actually had their gallbladder removed and you're trying to address fat breakdown and improve that whole fat breakdown in the gut would be to use things like soy lecithin, which is a fat emulsifier, and use that kind of supplement instead of something like artichoke. And the other thing really to consider with artichoke is if there was a suspicion you had gallstones or your patient had gallstones, then I wouldn't use it for someone where there was that suspicion. So if there's pain associated with the gallbladder, then I wouldn't use something like artichoke for that person. And there is apparently like a bit of a, when you've got them all laying on the bed, apparently you can like hook your fingers sort of up under the rib cage, and if there's pain, then that's an indication that the gallbladder is maybe inflamed. So obviously it would be something we'd want to send back to the GP about. Gut integrity issues caused by an overgrowth of pathogenic bacterial yeast in the gut. So it can be, again, it can be difficult to identify unless you're using stool type sampling, laboratory testing. But I think the main thing is always the chronic and frequent fatigue that people might experience, which is always worth looking at actually their gut health and what they might be experiencing from gut health, because it isn't something that immediately comes to someone's mind is, oh my God, I'm so, I can't remember anything, I'm getting headaches, I'm feeling, I'm feeling a bit, I'm having allergies or anything like that. It's not immediately apparent to someone to go, oh, it could be my gut. And obviously there are other causes. Women, obviously it can potentially be a hormonal issue. Often a blood sugar issue can cause these like fatigues, ups and downs. So there are other things which obviously could be the cause, but very often it's worth looking at the gut health and gut integrity as a focus to start with. Very much people will experience cravings, so they've got such a sweet tooth because their body is basically craving these sugars to feed the bacteria and the yeast. And often, of course, people who've had a history of antibiotic use, if they've had ongoing antibiotics used, then they've been slaughtering their friendly bacteria for ages. So, their body's ability to basically restore that balance is constantly being hammered by the antibiotics. So over a period of time, that obviously will have an issue with gut integrity because your army is being wiped out all the time by the antibiotics. Obviously, they're really important for people to take if they're being prescribed, but it is something to definitely consider what we can do to help someone who is on this kind of constant barrage of antibiotics on their gut health. So the action as far as diet and lifestyle goes is try and avoid the sugars and the yeast and the things which are feeding this pathogenic bacterial yeast in the gut. So you're really trying to eliminate what's causing the problem and what is this overgrowth that's causing this problem. Lots of things like fermented and fungal products like your mushrooms and beer, all the nice things, are worth avoiding, even if it's in the short term, just to see if actually it has a profound effect on someone who's done nothing with their gut health or their diet to help control something like this. Small changes can make a huge difference, in really kind of quite a short amount of time. So things like the fermented and the yeast and the sugars, restricting them can make a huge difference, and it's free. It doesn't cost anyone anything just to try and eliminate something from the diet. I always think elimination diet's the first thing to try, because if you pick on one or two things and really try go cold turkey on them, if they make a huge difference, then you've answered your question straight away, and it's something that you can then adapt your lifestyle and your diet around before you're just chucking in a whole load of supplements. Remove the culprit. So we have various different antimicrobial supplements available and in the diet as well. So garlic is a massive one, hugely used traditionally as an antifungal, antimicrobial herb, I guess it's a herb. And we do a product called Candaway, which I've got over there, which is a combination of herbs basically, which is shown to be antimicrobial. So you've got cinnamon, cardamom, oregano, olive leaf, I believe it's the 4 that are in there. And they are all fantastic antimicrobial herbs. So that product has been designed to be the supplement of choice for someone who is actively trying to kill off a pathogenic bacteria or candida or something like that in the gut. Always really important to support the immune system as well, though, at the same time with a good multivitamin. And again, we do a really nice multivitamin called Multi-Guard Control, which is it's the multivitamin of choice for someone who's also addressing a blood sugar balance issue. So for someone who is embarking on this kind of action, they're trying to restrict sugars. It can be hard for someone who's got a sweet tooth, so helping to control blood sugar is actually a really useful tool alongside this kind of supplement protocol. But the immune system health is really important, because as soon as we start to kill off any pathogenic bacteria, we have to detoxify, our liver has to be working well, and we need to support our immune system, because all of that is going to help obviously the recovery of your whole system as you sort it out. And then you repopulate the gut obviously with your pro and prebiotics. So we've got lots of different probiotics in the range. You'll have heard of acidophilus and bifidobacteria, I'm sure. We do a Saccharomyces boulardii, which is a yeast which is useful to help repopulate the gut. And then you get into the repairing. So this is where we come back to things like glutamine. So this problem has possibly been occurring for a long, long time in someone. Their gut integrity has become compromised because they're experiencing this more systemic brain fog and feeling of more internal, circulating issues, and things like eczema and psoriasis can occur. But it's all because you've got poor gut integrity. So at the end of the day, what we've got to do is restore that integrity. And that's where we go back to supplements like the L-glutamine powder, which is fabulous as part of that gut integrity improvement. And there's other supplements again, which we can talk about after the break, which are more specific to helping with that gut integrity issue. I think I'm going to stop there and we'll just go over this because I know everyone wants to have coffee. I just want to show you one thing, because it's going to be something in the demo. Oh, did they bring me a spoon? Sorry, I did ask them to bring me a spoon. I just wanted to show you a little demonstration of the digestive enzymes, which is a plant-based enzyme. This is just the demo that I do. This is porridge. But it's really stodgy porridge because it went cold this morning. So you can see it's all hard, and if I held it upside down it'd probably fall out, but it's a really kind of stodgy thing. So just as a demo, and I'm gonna sprinkle this on it, and then I'll leave it over there and you can come and see what it does, after you've had your tea and coffee. But basically a demo of this is that you just break a couple of capsules over it. This doesn't do it instantly, so you are going to have to come and see what it looks like in a bit, but just as a sort of a guideline of really what's happening with regard to how this helps our digestion when we've got poor digestive enzymes, poor stomach acidity, anything which we want to encourage the way that the food gets broken down in the stomach. We want to be able to make all of those particles as teeny and tiny as possible, so there's a much bigger surface area for digestive enzymes and all the other things to work on in the small intestine, so that we can release all the nutrients, our body can then digest all the actual nutrients we want to get from that food. But we've got to get it broken down into as smaller bits as possible. So I'll just put one, it just speeds it up if I put another one on. So come and see this after you've had your coffee, and you'll see what happens to it. I'm going to have some coffee now. Just finishing up quickly with, we talked about this just before the break. The intestinal permeability, obviously very much as a consequence of that dysbiosis we talked about before the break, and we kind of covered this quite a lot actually beforehand. But this is the thing where all of the previous symptoms are often apparent with this person, because it's all of those symptoms that have led them to actually have compromised gut health itself. Sometimes they can experience things like mucus or blood in the stool. Again, it's an irritation of the intestine, but more than anything, it's very much the systemic things. So it's still the sort of food sensitivities, the fatigue, maybe even like joint inflammation, a lot of the kind of chronic joint inflammation. As soon as you've got gut permeability happening, then all those small proteins and pathogenic bacteria and things which should normally only pass through the cell membrane and out into the bloodstream are now able to get through little gaps in between the cells, so they're kind of passing through in whole particles, if you imagine that. Can I have a little... Ah, here we go. Okay. So basically, all your nutrients should be going in through here, being processed and coming out into the blood. But where you've got this poor, what they call tight junctions between the epithelial cells, all these things like gluten, casein, so some of the things which we consider to be allergens, they can now come through these gaps and they come into the bloodstream as whole molecules, and then your body goes, oh my god, what's this? And just mounts a big immune response to it because it doesn't recognise it, and of course it will produce antibodies. And this is often now what they consider is the trigger for loads of our autoimmune conditions. So our rheumatoid arthritis and our lupus and all these things which actually become triggered somehow by an autoimmune like rush or an immune response, which then triggers these antibodies to be produced, and then of course then you have this exacerbated problem, and often it can be joint inflammation. So again, you may well be seeing patients who've got sort of chronic joint inflammatory problems which may have originated from an issue with gut health. So this is something obviously which is very much treatable. It's much more of a kind of long-term protocol for someone with, certainly with supplements.
Is this accepted by the medical profession, about leaky gut? And
I think more so now. I know a lot of nutritional therapists who are actively trying to work alongside GPs do get the the go ahead from GPs to follow in permeability protocols to try and restore that. So I think it is becoming more recognised as being an issue. But certainly something is triggering. I mean, it doesn't have to be gut permeability. Something like an autoimmune condition can be triggered by a virus or something else completely which initiates that antibody to be created, which then of course decides it's going to attack some other part of the body. But very commonly it's because our guts are fairly poor, and we've maybe experienced ongoing problems with gut health for some time, which it could well be worth addressing. And it doesn't always mean that someone's spent their life feeling like they've had irritable bowel. Some people it can be quite a kind of quiet thing going on in the background that might have contributed to it. But there's lots of things you can do without going on a huge supplement protocol to just try and see if that's like the cutting out the sugars and the obvious things which trigger the dysbiosis. But ultimately you're trying to restore that tight junction health. And that's where the supplements can play a really good role. In the short term, it doesn't have to be an ongoing lifetime of supplement use. It's worth considering how they've got to that point. So obviously things which have contributed to the problem over a long period of time, obviously addressing those. But the supplement protocol doesn't need to be a lifetime of supplements. It can be a 12-week protocol which can kind of go through all the stages of helping to restore gut integrity. But yeah, certainly I think the intestinal permeability is just the things where we're going to be seeing things which aren't just gut related. So it's definitely the skin, it's the allergies, it's the inflammation. And the action here, which we talked about a little bit before, always stress levels. Again, high cortisol is always going to impact on our mucous membrane health. Blood sugar balance is the big one here, because of course the sugars very much are going to... What happens with the blood sugar balance also is that the high insulin, when our bodies are producing excessive amounts of insulin and the cell membrane is now not responding properly to it because there's just been too much high sugar in the diet for too long, and someone's blood sugar has been that high and the body's been pumping out insulin for so long that the actual cell membrane receptors become just a bit bored of seeing insulin, so they don't want to respond to it anymore. And that's what we talk about when we talk about insulin resistance. So you end up with high insulin levels and high blood sugar, and high insulin in the body also contributes to inflammation. So again, where you've got these people who have got issues with gut integrity, possibly inflammation in the bowel or in the small intestine as well, addressing blood sugar is a way of helping combat the inflammation. And that obviously is a case for if we get, I don't think we're going to get onto musculoskeletal, but anything to do with inflammation, actually it's well worth looking at blood sugar control in someone as a way of helping to maintain better anti-inflammatory prostaglandin release. So blood sugar balance always a kind of a good idea to help someone who may be experiencing problems like that for all sorts of good reasons. The non-steroidal anti-inflammatories are coming in again, because again they're going to compromise that mucous membrane health and the epithelial cells in the gut. So avoiding anything like that. And it also depletes the body of nutrients as well. It compromises our nutrient absorption. Avoid crash dieting. Glutamine, which is that substrate for one of our main food sources for epithelial cells, is one of the first nutrients to be depleted if you just do crash dieting. And a lot of people who eliminate protein very much from the diet, again, glutamine is something which is compromised. So you can supplement glutamine in a powder form, and again, from the point of view of intestinal permeability, you need to be looking at 5 to 6 grams of L-glutamine a day, which if you're looking at one of our 500 milligram capsules, you're talking about 10 or 12 capsules a day, so it's just not practical, which is why we do the powder, which is a very good and cost-effective way of someone taking good, high, relevant levels of glutamine. Again, short-term use, I would always say a good protocol would be a kind of 12-week program or something like that, and then reassess. It's not something that needs to stop immediately as soon as that 3 months is up, but it's something it shouldn't be something you have to take indefinitely at that kind of level. You might want to consider something like a glutamine supplement. If you've had issues with your gut permeability, you might decide that actually you'll start taking a capsule once or twice a day, but you need to be taking that 5 or 6 grams indefinitely to help maintain your gut integrity. That shouldn't be necessary, but for a short term we want to be actually getting in really good high levels of that. So glutamine powder is definitely the one to consider when you're looking at the supplements. The chewing food well, again, is part of all of this system of digestion. I think it's one thing if we did, we would improve all sorts of things in our digestive health. But actually saliva contains this growth factor, which is again really important for the epithelial cells and tissue in the gut. So a big part of that, restoring the integrity there. And then the other thing is an anthocyanidin supplement. I don't know if any of you have heard of anthocyanidins. We have a lovely product called collidine. Any of you who are registered with us use collidine. Anthocyanidins are basically the flavonoids compounds that we get in the pigment of like the dark red and black and blue berries and fruits and vegetables. And like all the flavonoid family, they all have lovely properties, antioxidant properties, anti-inflammatory properties, some of them. Anthocyanidins are particularly good at helping to promote the health of collagen throughout the body. So again, musculoskeletal, it's worth considering this product. But in the gut lining, it's really important for helping improve those tight junctions, so those gaps that occur in the leaky gut. Anthocyanidins have been shown to be really effective in helping to build them back up again or make them tight junctions. So an anthocyanidin supplement is again a really nice supplement to be considering in that protocol. And actually things like collidine, they're very effective used in these sort of 12-week programs, but actually they're such a fabulous antioxidant, they're such a fabulous all-round supplement for the body. They can be things that people might consider just to use as an indefinite supplement if they're that way inclined to take a supplement on a daily basis, and a really nice sort of all-rounder. So the last one, when we get much further down, is your constipation. So the contributing factors of this are very obvious. Like fibre, so low fibre diets are the first one. The dehydration is crucial, and so particularly in the elderly aren't drinking anything but water or fluids during the day, and it is a huge factor for causing constipation, the dehydration. And low bifidobacteria, that's the other one. Bifido is really important for transit time in the gut, so bifidobacteria can compromise that. We talked about the low hydrochloride in the stomach, so low stomach acid obviously potentially can inhibit that peristalsis. Lack of exercise, I mean that's a huge one. Again, sedentary lifestyle for people with constipation isn't ideal. And obviously there are people who aren't able to exercise for various different reasons, but even small amounts of movement are crucial for helping with that peristalsis. Stress, again, serotonin, really important for the movement muscles in the gut. And of course, actually, people who have overused laxatives as youngsters and just constantly taking laxatives, maybe for dieting purposes in the past, can contribute to problems in the colon and just make it lazy, because they've just always never had to do much, really, is it? If it's been laxatives have been used all the time. So the action is obviously to reverse all these things, really. So eating a high fibre diet, reduce the sort of bad saturated fats and sugars that we talked about before. Again, we talked earlier about artichoke, absolutely amazing for people with this kind of sluggish bowel, well worth considering. And it's something, again, I think, gets overlooked quite easily. Milk thistle, again, more commonly known, more of a kind of general liver function. But of course, if you've got lingering waste material in your bowel, your liver is having to, is being further burdened from that detoxification process. So actually supporting liver health is equally as important at that time as well. But artichoke, being a relative of that thistle family, still offers that liver support. So I wouldn't necessarily think you'd need to take both. You could quite happily just kind of, stick with the artichoke. FOS is something we haven't talked about yet. FOS is a prebiotic, fructooligosaccharides is what it stands for. We get this, it's similar to inulin, if you've heard or seen other products which are called inulin, very similar prebiotic. Our FOS comes from chicory root. You also get prebiotics from things like Jerusalem artichokes, which really I was talking to someone earlier about. Jerusalem artichoke, not to be confused with globe artichoke, which is what the one for constipation is for. But Jerusalem artichoke is also a source of FOS. But these prebiotics, they're a source of fuel for our friendly bacteria in the gut. They're also a really good way of drawing moisture into the gut as well. So this is why, obviously, for someone who's constipated, it can be really crucial. So they can be used alongside your probiotic to restore gut flora, as a way of really helping to encourage that gut flora, and also they help to draw moisture into the bowel as well. So again, from someone who's constipated, it's a really good fibre, basically a prebiotic fibre, that's a really useful tool in helping combat constipation. The water consumption is a must, at least 3 pints a day. Again, increase exercise if possible, certainly just some sort of movement during the day. Again, it's very difficult for when it's elderly patients or disabled to get that movement, but even if it doesn't have to be walking about movement, it can just be movement of any type, which is actually going to help things get moving. So now we come to the supplements.
Sorry, you've talked a lot about people with constipation. What about people who get diarrhea?
Yeah, do you know what, actually, it should have been covered a little bit more when we talked about the Candida, I think. Things like C. difficile, bacteria, infections, a lot of them are helped very much by an anti-inflammatory diet when you're looking at actually the effect on the gut itself, because often people who experience ongoing diarrhea problems actually encourage a sort of irritation of the gut lining. So often it would be something that would be worth addressing, like an anti-inflammatory effect protocol on the gut. And I think the main things from the point of view of supplements is actually to address what it is that's causing it. And I think from a lot of the nutritional therapists go down the laboratory testing route at that point, because they consider that there really is a pathogen that needs to be addressed. C. difficile, for instance, is one of the very common ones, which is the Clostridium, and that is something that has been shown to be very well affected by the Saccharomyces boulardii yeast bacteria as a supplement, which seems to be able to stop that adherence of the gut lining, which causes the build-up of that pathogen and then causes a lot of diarrhoea. But there's lots of different types of diarrhoea, and often, of course, because it's more specific to particular bacteria or pathogens that are causing it, I suppose there's broad-term supplement regimes for it, like using things like Saccharomyces boulardii, but really identifying what's effectively causing it is probably the way that people would address it first, or at least try and identify what was causing it. But I think from the point of view of if it's travellers' diarrhoea, I mean, obviously if it's regular diarrhoea, you could consider it could be low stomach acid, of course, because that would be something that if you were just ingesting pathogens and they're not being killed off initially, that would be worth looking at for someone who has experience with ongoing diarrhoea problems. But I think more than anything it's about re-establishing that gut flora and addressing a bit of an anti-inflammatory diet and supplement protocol just to stop any inflammation occurring within the gut during that period. But I think often it would be laboratory testing that people would do to try and identify if there's a specific culprit causing it.
I was thinking more of a sort of IBS person who doesn't have constipation but tends to have...
Yeah, I think for me it would be Saccharomyces boulardii as a colonising bacteria and an anti-inflammatory regime for someone like that to try and inhibit. So you're trying to balance out what might be causing it from the pathogen side of it, and then address the inflammation that can cause it, because that can often make people have a very delicate bowel and cause the body just to sort of produce a diarrhoea effect rather than get constipated or anything else. So they would be the two actions I think I would probably follow.
Is that sacrament?
So Saccharomyces boulardii is it's a yeast which has been shown to be very effective in helping to combat things like Clostridium, which are a very common cause of diarrhoea, and also lots of the travellers' diarrhoeas with different pathogens, but then also go down the anti-inflammatory gut health route as well. That would be the main action, I think.
Can I just ask about FODMAPs? Because so much if you're having to use that as an approach, lots of things are contraindicated. You can't have FOS for a start.
No, I know.
Lots of fruits you can't have.
Lots of fruits, yeah. FODMAPs is quite a not severe is the wrong word, but quite
but it was
restrictive.
But it was originally looked at for treating irritable bowel. What was the cause of irritable bowel? And these were the foods that they found.
Yeah, because it's all those fermentable
sugars, isn't it?
Yeah. There are. It's a very restrictive diet. But having said that, if you do follow it to its entirety, then obviously it can relieve a lot of people's symptoms. Whether or not it's something that most people would actually be able to do in its completely. But I think it's something that's, if it's severe problems like diarrhoea and things which have been an ongoing issue contributing to other intestinal permeability as well, then I think a FODMAPs diet in the short term to try and establish whether it makes a difference.
It's also in constipation, it's indicated. I mean, you either get constipation or diarrhoea or both, don't you? And it's difficult to be...
It is very difficult to specify exactly what it is, which is why I think so many people are now doing the laboratory testing to actually identify and take the guesswork out of it and just say this is the profile and these are things now which we can address more specifically for people. But certainly, I mean, I think the fermentable foods, you can introduce an element of that into anybody's diet, which can make quite a big difference to someone who's experiencing gut health problems and digestive issues, even if it's just a few of the things that you decide not to be consuming. I mean, the obvious ones are things like beer and all those kind of yeast-based foods that are reasonably easy these days to actually eliminate from the diet as well. The other thing is we have an industry which means that there's lots of alternatives available which weren't available a long time ago. So a lot of the breads and things that you can actually at least replace in the diet where people think I can't live without bread, but there are alternatives now. So once upon a time it would have been hard for people to try and do these restrictive diets, but now there's a lot more. Even in Sainsbury's you can walk down the aisles and find lots of these alternative common foods which actually are aimed at people who are trying to avoid certain things like gluten and all things that are irritating to digestive health. So I think you can do a bit of all of it, but if you can be particularly restrictive, then FODMAPs probably is a good thing to try if you've got real issues with things like diarrhoea or constipation. It's just a hard thing to get people to actually stick to, I think, more than anything. So product-wise, we just started with digestive enzymes can be a really useful, inexpensive, don't need to be taken every day, symptomatic relief for a lot of people. Like I said, I do tend to take them if I'm eating quite a heavy kind of protein meal. People tend to get familiar with what it is that makes them just feel a bit, if it's not an ongoing problem, it's just something that actually can help their digestion. The digestive enzymes we do, they're a plant source, so they're vegan. There are some digestive enzymes out there which are derived from ox bile, which isn't right nice, but this one is a plant-based one. Really difficult to compare other products on the market. I had to do this little thing years ago, looking at all the different ones that we had available, in the health food shop and try and compare them, and it really is almost impossible because we all use these different enzyme activity levels to measure the actual digestive enzymes in each of our products, and so it makes it almost impossible to compare. All I found out was that basically it turns out plant enzymes work in a much wider pH range, so they makes them a little bit more versatile for someone who's just using a digestive enzyme. Obviously they're a vegan option, which is nice. And basically it has a full profile of your lipase, your amylase, your protease. What we don't have is lactase in ours, which is the lactose enzyme for digesting lactose. We choose to keep it separate, basically because not everyone is lactose intolerant. A lot of people are, but it's something that if you are lactose intolerant, you're probably addressing that through your diet as much as you can. And if you fall off the wagon a little bit and you need a bit of cheese in your life, you've got a lactase enzyme you can take. It doesn't need to be in, like a sort of daily digestive enzymes. So it's available separate. But this one certainly is the thing that you can use for that person who maybe just has that initial discomfort after eating, feels a bit bloated, wants to try something. They're going to do it a bit with their diet, but maybe you're not entirely convinced they're going to do what you've said to do. So an enzyme is a really useful supplement to consider, and not an expensive thing. 100 capsules, doesn't need to be taken every day. And I know I put 3 of those capsules in that little bit quote. That's just to hurry up a little bit to show you. You would just take one, and you just take it about 15, 20 minutes before you eat. This is the FOS. So this is our fructooligosaccharides. It basically just our friendly bacteria favour it, and it just offers a really useful food source for our friendly bacteria. So it's a really good way of helping to encourage that improvement in gut flora. If you're taking a probiotic as well to try and restore gut flora on like a candida type regime, it's a useful thing to take alongside. There's some really good studies on FOS. One of the studies here at the bottom showed 8 grams, which is quite a lot to start with. I wouldn't advise people go straight in there and take like almost 2 teaspoons, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But 8 grams of FOS taken for just 2 weeks. It led to, I think it was a 20 times increase in beneficial bacteria. I think that there was some weird typo with that, so don't read it. But basically, 8 grams over 2 weeks led to 20 times an improvement in bifido levels. So that alone, FOS is a fabulous way of helping to restore or maintain people's good gut flora. It would be something if someone had been on a 12-week program, quite an intensive antimicrobial, probiotics, liver function, everything else. They were really trying to address a gut issue, and they're coming to the end of that and they're starting to look at things that they can continue taking as an ongoing maintenance. That's the sort of thing FOS would be fabulous for. And probiotics shouldn't really need to be taken every day. Lots of people take an acidophilus supplement every day, as part of their just routine. You shouldn't need to take that if you've got no gut issues. Actually, there's 500 odd different bacteria in our guts. Acidophilus and bifido are only 2 of them, so we shouldn't need to be taking a supplement like that indefinitely. People do, but actually this would be the better option, because this is a prebiotic, so it's just going to help. If you've got yourself to a nice, happy gut flora and you've done your protocol and you're feeling better, something like FOS actually should be the sort of thing which you can take as an ongoing supplement a lot more cost effectively and a lot more beneficially, because it's going to help keep everything happy, not just add in an extra 2 bacteria. The issue with FOS is that it makes you fat. That's the trouble. So if you take 8 grams a day straight off, you are going to know it. And the general principle is if you've got someone with any kind of gut health issues, you don't want that to happen to them. So initially we say just start with a tiny bit of FOS, literally like a pinch on the end of a teaspoon, and just every day increase it a little bit until you get to the point where you're maybe having a teaspoon a day. And you don't need to take it in one go. That teaspoon can be spread across the day, but at some point you should be able to tolerate a teaspoon a day without it making you fat. But if you do it straight away, that is probably what's going to happen. So don't, basically, because you put people off straight away and then never want to take it again. So it is takes a little bit of time for people to get used to, but it is fabulous once you take it. And if you can keep taking that as your daily maintenance to maintain bowel health, you've got moisture, you've got a fibre, so you're gaining moisture in the bowel, you're helping improve all your friendly bacterial health. It's a win-win. So definitely one to consider. Just bear in mind the thing because it does put people off quite quickly. Lamberts have various different probiotics. Acidophilus and bifidobacterium are the main strains which you'll see in supplements. There are some more broader bacterial like formulas which use various different other ones. Acidophilus, Lactobacillus acidophilus and bifidobacterium, they're kind of primary strains in the gut. They're the ones that will restore gut flora quickly, particularly bifido, really important for the production of nutrients and B vitamins. So they're the ones that tend to be, they dominate all the clinical studies, which of course is what Lamberts likes to see, because then we'll reflect it in our products. We use what's known as a DR capsule, which is a delayed release capsule now, because of course the one thing you don't want is to take your supplement, your little capsule breaks down, exposes all the bacteria, and your stomach acid kills it all off. So we use this delayed release capsule, which basically, there is a little thingy here. It basically means that it's delivered way down into the base of the stomach and into the small intestine before this capsule shell effectively breaks down and actually exposes the bacteria. So you're getting it down to where you want it to. And I can't read that very well, but I think they guarantee it's something like 90 minutes or something. I can't read it properly because it's too blurry. But basically that's the way it's delivered to where you want it to. So what you don't want to do is take it and have it just killed off straight away. So that's how we do it. So the Acidophilus 10 is our highest strength lactobacillus product. We do an Acidophilus 4. This would be the one I would say would be used in those short-term protocols for restoring gut flora quickly. So during a dysbiosis program where you're effectively using an antimicrobial to kill off the pathogens, you're restoring your army of friendly bacteria, and you're improving things like liver health and immune health. This would be the level which you'd want to take during that period. And you can take, we do 10 billion, which is quite conservative compared to some on the market. You get some really, really strong probiotics now. We stick to this because it's really what we see in the clinical data. There really isn't very much in the way of randomised control studies using these huge amounts that we see now on the market. You can obviously double up this. Practitioners do it all the time, say I want you to take 2 or 3 of these a day. But actually 10 billion ought to be sufficient if you're taking it every day, and it's in a delayed release, so you're getting it into where it wants to be, and that's what we see effective. Maybe up to 2 a day for someone who's really addressing a dysbiosis. And then the 4 billion is something which is, again, maybe used towards the end of a protocol for someone wanting to continue taking it for a bit longer, and then FOS comes after that. So it's just a way of kind of reducing down a little bit the level that you take. The 4 billion is also very good for children because you can open the capsule, and the bacteria itself is robust enough to survive enough of the way down. If you're taking it away from food, so you're taking it away from stimulating any stomach acid, you can still achieve effectiveness from it. But obviously, ideally, you want to be taking the capsule. But the level of 4 billion would be the sort of level we'd recommend for children. And then we've got the Saccharomyces boulardii, which is what we talked about earlier. Again, it's a probiotic yeast, this one, so it's not a bacteria. And this is what makes it fabulous for anyone who is this long-term antibiotic user or someone who is on a short term of antibiotics, and we can't be sure that actually those antibiotics aren't going to affect the probiotics someone's taking. So a lot of people go on an antibiotic program, suffer the consequences, want to take a probiotic supplement, but they're still maybe taking their antibiotic. We don't know if that's going to really be much of a benefit for someone who's taking an antibiotic when they're trying to take a probiotic. But the difference is with this yeast is that it's not affected by antibiotic use. So this is a fabulous one for someone who's either on long-term antibiotic use or they're taking a short-term, and it has been shown to be really effective in things like the C. difficile that we were talking about earlier, and E. coli even. It's also thought to promote the fatty acid caprylic acid, which is used a lot with candida programs. We don't actually do a caprylic acid supplement. But what caprylic acid is thought to do when it comes to the candida yeast is where candida puts out these little filaments to grab hold of the gut lining and stick there. Caprylic acid helps to inhibit that sort of stickiness of candida, if you want to call it that. And what Saccharomyces boulardii does is it produces caprylic acid. So although we don't have a caprylic acid supplement, this is actually a good way of using it in that kind of protocol because it's going to help to crowd out unfriendly bacteria, but it's also going to inhibit the adherence of those things like candida in the gut wall. So it's a really good one to consider with any of these dysbiosis type symptoms that people have. Again, unaffected by exposure to stomach acid, and it's really the antibiotic thing which makes it so effective. And as far as our supplement goes, comparing it with the market, I think we just find that ours is the strongest. It's 6 billion organisms per capsule, which I think just beats most of the ones that I've seen anyway. So definitely, I think if anything, actually, this has become almost my probiotic of choice because of the fact that it's useful for people who are taking antibiotics, which is very common these days.
So is that not suitable for someone with candida because it's yeast-based?
Well, no, interestingly, that's not supposed, although it is a probiotic yeast, it doesn't have the same effect. It's not a fermentable yeast in the way we think of it with a diet, for instance. And the benefits outweigh, I think, any of the negativity, particularly with that candida. So I think if someone is particularly concerned with that, then, and they're not on an antibiotic, for instance, then of course the probiotics like the lactobacillus are still very well established for being the one in the clinical studies, and they will certainly crowd out pathogens. But I think the fact that it's a probiotic yeast makes it different from what we consider like a fermentable yeast in the diet. So Candida whey we mentioned earlier, this is our antimicrobial. So this is the person who's got an overgrowth of pathogenic bacteria, like a dysbiosis of some sort, causing that kind of foggy brain, and they're starting to get more of a systemic issues. So you're addressing it from the point of view of there's an overgrowth of something pathogenic here. This is our antimicrobial. So it contains the cinnamon, the olive leaf, oregano, fennel. Cinnamon is interesting because it's really good at helping people with that insulin resistance. So again, the diet perspective of this particular protocol is to avoid sugars, try and reduce the amount of sugar, refined carbs in the diet. For some people who are craving these sugars because they've got this overgrowth, of course that's quite hard. So helping maintain good blood sugar is a really crucial part of that whole protocol. And cinnamon is a really good herb for not only being antimicrobial, but also it helps to trigger that insulin receptor on the cell membrane. So when we talk about insulin resistance, we're talking about a body that's constantly been pumped out insulin because the diet has been so high in sugar for so long that the cell membrane has just got bored of seeing insulin, and it doesn't really doesn't become that effective anymore. So of course the blood sugar never gets into the cell, never gets used as energy, and then just maintains high blood sugar, and eventually of course the body dumps it as glycogen stores and fat stores. What cinnamon does is just trigger that insulin receptor. So with someone who's addressing their diet and they're trying to reduce the amount of sugar and refined carbs, but they're also trying to trigger that mechanism which is going to use the sugar that they are consuming for energy as well, and help to reduce this up and down in blood sugar, which can cause the cravings as well, and of course exacerbate things like dysbiosis. Cinnamon is fabulous. And there's another ingredient, the alpha-lipoic acid, which is another really useful supplement for blood sugar. But in this product, of course, cinnamon has a fabulous antimicrobial action, which is why it's being used as part of this product. So this is the remove part of that program. So this is let's remove the pathogen. Olive leaf and oregano, again, very much immune support as well. Fabulous immune support. And this was interesting. That BTS that I was talking about earlier, the biological testing service that do stool sampling. I used to just have one of the ladies that used to work for the company. She was a German lady, and she was involved with the laboratory back in Germany. And they were looking for part of the protocol that they put together for people who the screening showed a candida overgrowth, was they were trying to put together their own protocol that they recommended for practitioners. And they were looking at the various different antimicrobials available, and she came to me and said, what have you got? Because we're basically doing an in vitro study in the laboratory looking at actually how it affects the growth of candida. So this basically was their little in vitro study using Candaway. So this supposedly, all this white stuff is candida. This is just a control, and this blob here is Candaway. And basically it just shows that actually around the Candaway substance, combination of herbs, the candida yeast isn't growing. So it's just a sort of very topical way of showing that it's actually having this effect in a petri dish, but as an antimicrobial. And I haven't got the slides for it, but she showed me various other ones like caprylic acid, and they were very similar, but this had a much more kind of even distribution of kind of killing off area. So it's just a nice little thing to show again how these things potentially are working in the gut, and actually they are really effective. So milk thistle we talked about earlier, again, really good liver support. Lamberts do one of the only licensed milk thistles. I don't know whether any of you are aware, but several years ago this big THR thing came out, which was the traditional herbals licensing, and it forced us into licensing herbs which we wanted to have over a certain level of extract. And they were all the herbs which you wouldn't commonly see in the diet. So things like ginger and garlic and cinnamon, they were all exempt from it, but things like milk thistle, which aren't commonly found in our culinary use, they all became liable for this licensing. So most of the products on the market now which don't have a license have had to reduce the levels of extract, but there was a few that we just were adamant that we were going to keep at the level we wanted, because again all the clinical data is there to support them, and our milk thistle is one of the strongest at 300 milligram extract. We do have a lower dose one as well, so we chose to keep it under the THR level of milk thistle too. But really, if you're looking at liver health and maintaining liver function, this sort of level, again, probably short term. I mean, a general consensus is that actually herbal use, they're still medicines, so still need to be considered as you would a medicine, which is, we don't want people taking these indefinitely. They're there to serve a purpose and to help restore function of certain things like the liver, but actually we shouldn't rely on taking a milk thistle supplement every day. if we feel the need to take a milk thistle supplement in every day, you're doing something wrong. You're drinking too much, or you're eating really badly, or there's other things you could do to help control your liver function. But as a supplement goes, it's basically there to offer that detoxification pathways that the liver do, and really important for someone who's on that kind of dysbiosis candida regime. When you're killing off all that nastiness with the Candida way, you're restoring gut bacteria with your probiotics, but you are releasing toxins all the time by doing that. So obviously you want to have a really fully functioning liver to be able to stave off any of those excess toxins. And milk, this is the other thing, increases the production of glutathione. Glutathione is one of the tripeptides that works on the methyl cycle in the liver. So it's really important for our phase 2 detoxification pathway, which is the one which is actually the elimination pathways in the liver. So it's a really important herb to consider. But again, with the artichoke being there, sometimes it's just worth seeing whether there's one or the other is going to be the better option, because artichoke is the one which is going to stimulate bile flow. So maybe more suited for the person who has the constipation issues, has maybe a potential problem with cholesterol, raised cholesterol, and also has that sort of fatty food dyspepsia intolerance, where it is an obvious problem with, particularly with lipids. But artichoke, if you go away from here today with any one herb that you're thinking, oh, I didn't know about that, let it be artichoke, because I love this product. It's just not widely enough used. Here's the glutamine.
Sorry, just come back a little bit. It says at the bottom here, it's beneficial to those with addressing raised cholesterol. Can you take that with statins?
You can take it with statins, yeah. It would, for me, it'd be a really good thing for someone who is trying to come off the statins. The trouble is the statins are overriding most things at that point anyway. So yes, you can take it with the statins, but whether or not it will be having any particular beneficial, addition, it would be more helpful because it's going to support the liver and because it will help with bile flow anyway. So with contributing factors like the constipation, I would say for someone who has been just, had their cholesterol checked, it's too high, doctor's saying, I think you should go on a statin, they're like, oh, I want to go on a statin. That's where something like artichoke would be fabulous to try. And there's a bit of a protocol for addressing that for me, which is the artichoke to encourage the bile flow. There's the choline we were talking about earlier, which is really important. Choline and inositol, but choline particularly, really important for mobilising fats in the liver. So what you want to do is, you've got circulating cholesterol, it's coming back into the liver, and the only way it's getting out is via the bile. So you mobilise the fats in the liver, you encourage all of those detoxification pathways on fats in the liver, and then artichoke comes along, helps to encourage the secretion of that bile into the small intestine, and bile is predominantly made up of cholesterol. So you're getting the cholesterol from circulating into the liver, out of the liver, into the small intestine, and the third product in that protocol is the plant sterols. And they're the ones which, I think if it's not in your pack, it's over there. There's a really good booklet thing we have on it. Plant sterols are a really similar molecular structure to cholesterol. And what they do is they compete, if they're in the gut, and you just secreted a whole load of bile into the gut because your bile flow is really good because you've been taking artichoke and this, that and the other, then the plant sterols hang about in their options to get back into the body, and it has to go out. So it's the way of gradually being able to reduce circulating cholesterol. So particularly good for someone who hasn't yet gone on the statins, is a bit desperate not to, or maybe they've been on statins and they've had really bad side effects from it. Then those three products I think are a really good option for someone who's trying to address cholesterol in itself. And as a consequence, of course, digestive health ought to improve as well, if that is also an issue for someone. But there is quite a lot of really nice products I think now which you can use. Obviously, diet being the primary change for anyone, but as a supplement protocol, there's some really good options now for people. Glutamine we talked about lots, so obviously this is the powder form, really good substrate for epithelial cells, so in any kind of gut integrity program or mucous membrane health program in general. So we're talking all the time about gut integrity, but actually any of those kind of high stomach acid issues where there's been sensitivity and irritation to the stomach and to the hiatus hernia and things like that, then another really good reason to consider glutamine in the diet, because it's going to help all those mucous membranes and all that epithelial health through the gut lining as well. So a really good supplement to consider. And again, short-term use, doesn't need to be something everyone's taking indefinitely. Collagen, like this is our anthocyanidins. This is the other product if you go away thinking about anything as this one. I can categorically say this is the highest strength anthocyanidin I've seen on the market, and I spend a lot of time standing around in health food shops looking to see if I can find one that's better, and I haven't been able to find one yet. It really is the strongest anthocyanidin. It comes from grapeseed and bilberry. It's all to do with these flavonoids that are the pigment in these plants, the dark, dark berries. Really good antioxidants, really good at actually helping combat inflammation. But for this particular talk, it's all about gut integrity. So this is another product to consider. You don't need to be taking all of them, but it's something that, again, I think could be a really good ongoing supplement for someone. So they've done the canned away, they've got the probiotic in there, and they've been taking glutamine to help restore gut flora. This could be the thing that could become the kind of, I'm off the programme now, but I want something that I can continue taking to maintain my gut integrity, to maintain my collagen health, to act as my antioxidant of choice. It's the sort of thing that is a really, really good supplement to consider as part of someone's potentially ongoing supplement regime to help maintain good health. But it can also be used as part of that sort of 12-week process as well. It very much is going to depend on what people are really prepared to take, spend, and how committed they're going to be to it.
Is 12-week the shortest period you would recommend it for?
It would, yeah. I think 12 weeks is probably the minimum to really sort of establish whether something's, recovering. Certainly be the sort of time scale that I would say, if symptoms haven't improved by then, there's a different action that needs to be taken probably. So I think that the 12-week thing is useful for sort of deciding whether something's actually working and doing what you're trying to achieve, and also a time limit for you to consider that actually this is sufficient time now of doing this regime. We can now look at a maintenance level or maintenance regime kind of going forwards. The 12 weeks, I think, is always, for things like gut health, it's a minimum to see if your symptoms have improved. It can continue on after that, but it should be a good time limit to really tell whether something's working for someone, and to persevere until that kind of time is up before you maybe consider that maybe there's different action you want to take. If something really isn't doing anything, then is there a different pathway we need to go down to help restore something different. The collagen is a fabulous supplement, and again, a little bit overlooked sometimes in the range, but really one that's ought to have more hailing. And turmeric, curcumin. I mean, I could talk all day about this, and certainly if we've got onto musculoskeletal, I'd be talking about how to do with inflammation. But with regard to both joint inflammation and gut inflammation, it's all about the pathways that curcumin works on, and it really does work on so many different anti-inflammatory pathways, all very similar to what you'd see in the medications that we take for inflammation. Basically, curcumin is the compound present in the turmeric plant, or the root, and it's certainly the curcumin that has been identified as having all this lovely antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, everything, properties, but it's very much about delivering the right levels of curcumin. So there's loads and loads of different supplements on the market. There's a lot of whole herb supplements, and I think there's probably a whole talk in itself about herbs and the market and all the different variants you see, you know, in the health food shops and everywhere else. But ultimately, to achieve these anti-inflammatory properties, you need to be getting that curcumin level right. So a good supplement ought to always tell you how much curcumin there is in the supplement. If it can't actually state that, then it's probably what we call a whole herb, which means it's as good as your curcumin you'd use, or your turmeric, sorry, you would use in your cooking in a capsule. So it will be supplement grade curcumin, so it'll be very good quality. It won't just be the stuff we do buy in Sainsbury's, but it effectively, as far as levels go, that's all you're getting. We do something called standardising an extract, and what that does is it basically takes your dried turmeric, like you get for food, puts it through an extraction process, which usually uses, like, I think with turmeric it uses an ethanol extraction because it's a fat-soluble compound. And effectively what that does is it just removes all the insoluble fibre part of that plant material. So with something like turmeric, which is a root, big proportion of that is just insoluble fibre, which, as far as putting it in your mouth will do, is all it's going to offer is a transit. There's no therapeutic value to that, apart from it being a fibre going through your digestive system. However, all those other compounds that are present within that turmeric are left behind in what we call the extract. But it's only once you get it to the extract that you can then measure the compounds like curcumin. So there's lots of, every herb that we have on the market now, we've usually identified one of the compounds, one or two. So with milk thistle it's silymarin, with artichoke it's cynarin, with turmeric it's curcumin. We can now measure the amount of curcumin because we've taken it to an extract. And the reason we supply an extract is because all of the clinical studies out there are done on a standardised extract. And the reason they do that is because they can guarantee during this study everybody's getting exactly the same amount, which you couldn't do if you used a whole herb version. So a standardised extract should always be able to give you the level of curcumin, and ultimately that's what you're trying to get all the time from your turmeric product, because that's what's having all these lovely anti-inflammatory properties.
Two things. One, therefore, why do you produce turmeric, not just curcumin? And the other thing, I thought we need black pepper to absorb it properly.
Our turmeric, curcumin comes from turmeric. So this product, these two products are turmeric root extracts. So they've been taken through this extraction process, and then you measure curcumin. So curcumin itself isn't a separate product, it's what comes from the turmeric plant.
So why have we got the two products?
Because this one, it's really very much about the name of this one. The turmeric root extracts, the curcumin in those products relies very much on fat delivery, because the compound itself is fat delivered. There's another word, I'm going a bit rambling now. So it relies very much on fat delivery in the gut to be absorbed into the bloodstream to have all those lovely anti-inflammatory effects. Now for some people obviously that can be compromised. That's where the black pepper thing comes in, because what a lot of companies have done now is said black pepper does seem to dilate certain pathways in the gut, making the curcumin more easily absorbed. And that does seem to be true, although there's no clinical data anywhere using that combination of products. So there's no clinical studies on arthritic inflammation using curcumin with black pepper or turmeric with black pepper. But the theory is there, and we don't doubt that there is some role to be played with that. Our issue with black pepper is, one, the lack of safety data on it, because there isn't any, and two, is that it is an irritant, and potentially, we don't know, because there is no data, we're just not happy with the fact that we don't know what long-term safety there is on it. However, turmeric, there's a huge amount. But this basically is our challenge to the turmeric with black pepper products, because this is actually a company name called Curcumin, and you can actually Google it and see the clinical studies on it. They've done some special, don't ask me how, molecular dispersion technique with the curcumin molecule, and they basically dispersed it in, I think it's a phospholipid, into something which behaves more like a water-soluble molecule. So the gut is it's much easier for the gut to absorb that curcumin. And they reckon the people that have basically taken their nice new product and compared it with the likes of an extract, they will claim that their studies showed that it was up to 46 times better absorbed, taking their molecularly dispersed version than just standard turmeric. So really this product has come along because there's always going to be people who have really compromised fat digestion. We just talked about it. So it's poor bile flow, it's just general irritable bowel symptom problems. It's missing a gallbladder, all very common things. Someone who's got an inflammatory condition, thinking about taking turmeric, they might not get the value from taking a standard extract because actually they're not absorbing the curcumin properly. So that's where these products, the Curcumin Ultra, comes along as being your kind of maximum absorbed curcumin product. And it's well established now that it really does have a comparison, whereas there's a little bit of lack of data still with the black pepper. Somehow the market has suddenly been like bombarded with the likes of the turmeric and black pepper products, but there really isn't any data on it, which is why we kind of step back from it and say, actually, until we see some really good data and some safety element to it, we don't really want it in the product. But this, however, has been established as being very safe to take because effectively it's just from turmeric extract. It's just they've done something to it to make it better absorbed. But I think the thing for me with turmeric is they've identified curcumin as being the fabulous anti-inflammatory that it is. All of the clinical studies out there, which is massive, have all been done on standardised extracts. So all your musculoskeletal, your Alzheimer's studies, your anti-cancer studies that we can't talk about, they've all been done on standardised extract. They've not done the same studies on these products. What this company has done is compare the two in a human being as to how well absorbed they are. So theoretically they're saying this has got to be the better product because you're getting more curcumin from it. But actually, if someone hasn't got any problems with gut health, there's no reason for them not to take a standardised extract. It's certainly cheaper than buying the Curcumin Ultra. But for someone with compromised gut health, which we're talking about today, Curcumin Ultra may well be the one that actually they ought to consider over the standard extract, just to get the most out of their turmeric product. But basically, in gut health, it offers all that lovely anti-inflammatory help for someone who's experiencing the delicate bowel, the really diarrhea type gut. So there's a lot of sort of irritation occurring in the gut. Someone who's got intestinal permeability, the high stomach acid, which might be causing inflammation in the higher digestive health. All these things obviously mean that turmeric could be valuable in that protocol. And of course, from the point of view of your musculoskeletal, of course, it's got fabulous benefit for people trying to achieve anti-inflammatory properties from something that isn't a Nurofen or isn't one of the typical medications. It can be really, really effective. And I would say, actually, I mean, I've always said this to all of my osteopaths and chiropractors who have people coming to them, who've got acute inflammation problems, and maybe there's a reason they really can't take Nurofen or painkillers or anything like that, but they're really trying to address this inflammation. I'm always happy to offer samples for you to trial. So, if you have somebody you think, they're not going to want to pay for it, but I'd really like to see if this can help them, I'm more than happy to offer you samples for like a couple of months from a supplement, just to use it as your own case study, really, and to see if you can make a difference to someone, because it's the best thing for you, obviously, to see that result, hopefully positive. But it's not always something you want to put on someone, is the cost of a supplement, in a long-term supplement. So do always ask me if there's anything you want.
How long would you expect to see some results
A lot of people who love turmeric and find it really helpful have said that within weeks of taking it, they are experiencing. I mean, I would say I still go with this kind of 12-week as your rule of thumb. Is if I know someone doesn't want to wait 12 weeks to get relief from pain, but if someone has taken it for as long as 12 weeks and actually has experienced no change in pain and swelling and all the things which you'd expect to get relief from an anti-inflammatory, then to me there's other things that need to be put into play with that, and that just a supplement alone isn't going to be enough, or that actually for some reason this doesn't suit that person. There's no reason that turmeric's going to work for everybody, and there's lots of other anti-inflammatory herbs which I would say if someone hasn't experienced any change after 12 weeks of taking turmeric in the dose that we recommend, then I'd say scrap it and try something different. So if you haven't addressed officials and EPA levels already, then have a look at that. And if you're looking at a different herb, there's plenty of other herbs like the rosehip or the devil's claw. There's other herbs which you can try. So then I think I would shift it and just try something different. Because I think persevering indefinitely with something, particularly if you're trying to achieve like pain relief or something that's measurable, then there's no point in persevering too much, longer than 12 weeks. I think it's just a good ballpark figure to say, has it done anything? No, absolutely not. Then let's try something different. But there's always other things which you can kind of work alongside, and it's one of the reasons landlords don't really do a lot of lots of combination products, because there's often all these herbs, for instance, have been trialled at high levels independently. They've never been trialled as a combination. The combinations that people put together are based on each one of those herbs' value, but putting them all together doesn't mean that they're any more valuable as a combination. They're just, each one of them has their value, but what often happens if in a combination product you end up with just much smaller amounts of each of them, which they don't accumulate into something that's as strong as their sort of the lone turmeric at the proper strength that you ought to be taking it. So I think Lambert's view is all these things have value at the levels which we've had established in the trials. So try one at the level we know is effective. If it just doesn't work for you, try a different one. Don't just take a kind of whole cocktail of lots of little bits of things and wonder which one might be doing the job. And I think there are a lot of products like that out in the market now which are based on really good clinical data, but they're a combination of turmeric and ginger and devil's claw and something else, but they're all in tiny little amounts put into a product and then hailed as being like an anti-inflammatory product, when actually, but there's nothing to say that that small amount of turmeric's going to do anything. Just because it's alongside ginger and it's alongside rosehip and it's alongside something else. If you took paracetamol, Nurofen, aspirin, codeine, all the different medicines we know are pain relief, we know we take 2 of those paracetamol or 2 of those Nurofen and we know it's going to work. If you were just to take one of those tablets and just chip a little bit off the corner of it, and chip a little bit of Nurofen and chip a little bit of paracetamol and put them in your hand and neck them, would they work as a combination in a teeny amount of each one? We don't know. They might do. No one's ever trialled it. But for us, we know that paracetamol has been shown to be effective in whatever, 500 milligrams or whatever it is, Nurofen has, and it's the same principle with the medicines, the medicinal herbs. They've been trialled and they've been shown to be effective in certain levels, so we, as landlords, make sure that we deliver that in the product and we don't just kind of isolate little teeny bits of this, that and the other and chuck them all into one product. So that's why you'll see good high levels, but usually individual herbs. There's a few exceptions, like the Candaway is obviously a combination, but the levels in it are all relevant to what we've seen clinically. So
if you're taking several of the drugs, you're taking your milk thistle and your whatever, are there any contraindications of taking any of these drugs together in a protocol?
No.
Advising your patients, you say, well, if you're on that one, you should take that one.
Not combining herbs. No. Certainly there are some things, like if you're on medications, you would want to avoid certain herbs. So things like ginkgo, which is shown to dilate blood vessels, really effective for cardiovascular health if you're not taking any blood pressure medication. But if you are, potentially you're at risk of altering what the dose ought to be. So there are certainly interactions that we want. None of them have been proven. They're all a little bit theoretical, but it's obviously worth being cautious. But there's none that I know of with one herb and another herb used, alongside each other that would actually be interactive. It's really just the medication which you just need to be careful of. And it's general rule of thumb, of course, is if the medication's been taken for this purpose, another herb which has a similar action, that's where really you need to just be cautious, because at the end of the day it's respect for the fact that all these medications are designed with certain half-lives. The St John's wort is the big one, because of course St John's wort is now contraindicated with quite a lot of medications. The reason is because it has a profound effect on our detoxification pathway in the liver, which is what makes it fabulous as a supplement, as part of its nature. But of course, if you're taking a medication that relies crucially on the half-life that's built into that tablet, that medication, you can't afford for your liver to be actually up-regulating that and actually breaking it down quicker than it ought to be. So that's the kind of, it's those sort of actions which have an interaction with medication. So herb on herb, no, but medication on herb, definitely. And even things like fish oils as well, still something to be wary of. I don't know what happened. I think we got to the end. What happened to the slideshow then? It's almost, I was going to say it's after anyway, isn't it? But anyway, hopefully that's taken you through some of the supplements in the range and a little bit about where you might want to use them in protocols. Our technical helpline is open Monday to Friday, 9 till 5:30, I believe. And then myself and all my colleagues, I think probably all of you are in my territory, as we call it, but I'm your technical representative, so I'm always available to come and sit down, chat with you through products, talk about how you might want to sort of use supplements in your clinics, or how you might want to sort of go about recommending supplements, and certainly just register with us, and then obviously it gives you access to all of the trade prices, even if it's just for yourself and your family. Then of course you get to get the benefit of the trade prices, and you can start looking at how you might want to use it in clinic as well.
Where in Tunbridge Wells are you based?
Our head office is Century Place, just at the end of the North Farm Industrial Estate.
Oh, okay.
There's nothing there, it's just literally an office, so it's nothing, you can't come and visit. We don't have a shop or anything. But supplements, I mean, in retail-wise, Tunbridge Wells, for instance, Helios, the homeopathic clinic and little shop, they have some Lamberts. Rust Hall, there's a healthy shop, Botanica, they have some Lamberts. If you don't, Botanica in Rust Hall.
Hamley's herbs in Broadhurst do.
Hamley's, yeah, Hamley's have got those. So there's little pockets, but it's not, Lambert's isn't a brand you're going to see in Superdrug or Boots or any of the big chains, and you're just going to see it in independent health food shops and some pharmacies, but they tend to be pharmacies where they've got a sort of genuine interest in nutrition and supplements, so they've got a catchment area that's interested in it as well. But primarily, you're our business practitioners, so everything we have set up with regard to sending to your patients, we can send supplements direct to patients, or we can send direct to you in clinic or home. Minimum order is only £25, so it's all set up for you to be convenient for you to be able to order, and all the information obviously is there very much to support you. And the seminars, I would say, if anything, get along to the seminars and come and see some of the really nitty-gritty stuff. But ultimately, hopefully I've introduced you to a little bit about Lambert's and obviously the gut health issue. And I'll have to save musculoskeletal till next time. Thank you.